Welcome to Concerning the Spiritual in Art, a podcast exploring spirituality, consciousness, and the creative process. I'm your host, Martin Benson. All right, y'all, welcome back to the podcast, 2026. We're going to kick it off with a bang with visual artist Jason McDonald, right on the heels of the Lunar New Year. It's our first episode in a while. I've been, was taking a break. I got, young kids and crazy life, all sorts of things going on. But this podcast is so important to me, and I'm super excited to kick this off with a bunch of new episodes, starting with this really special one. Jason McDonald is a visual artist based in Melbourne, Australia, but he's much more than just an artist. I mean, he's an explorer of consciousness. He's a researcher in brainwaves and understanding the relationship between aesthetic experience and how that impacts our brainwaves and what that might mean for the role that art could play in the elevation of consciousness. We talk a lot about his sort of spiritual journey, how he began his curiosity into spiritual practice, how that began to be woven into his art practice, and how that evolved into all the amazing things that he does. He also has some incredible essays that he's written about art that I find to be incredibly on point. And you're just going to love this episode. We had so much fun and just a kindred spirit in so many ways. And just listen to it and you'll see exactly what I mean. So here you go, Jason McDonald. All right, Jason, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks for having me here, Martin.
Yeah.
Great pleasure to connect with you, and let's see what we can find in the shared space together.
Yeah, I'm so excited to connect with you too. I mean, we kind of started getting connected through Instagram and the internet in the kind of like early fall of last year. And I just immediately drawn to the work you do, but also your writing and just like your whole perspective on this space of spirituality and art and contemporary art and kind of this really interesting moment, I think, that we're coming into where the contemporary art models maybe are kind of seeing a little bit of the futility of their approach, and there's something new that has a possibility of busting through the concrete. And I feel like, you're a part of that, and the way you put your words to it, all of that is just amazing. And so we're going to have a really fun time today, that's for sure. And I think,
Yeah, looking forward to it.
like we were talking just before we started recording, I think a very natural way to just jump into this conversation is something that I'm genuinely curious about is your spiritual journey. I know you're deeply kind of invested in philosophy, especially Eastern philosophy and sort of the Buddhist lens and Vajrayana Buddhism, which is something I'm personally interested in as well. But I'm curious, like, where did like the kernels of that begin to like emerge in your life, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, great question. I very early on, I grew up in a Christian household, a Catholic household, and there was a part of me that actually was thinking about wanting to be a priest because it was the only articulation or relationship I had to anything spiritual. And then as I sort of left the household and went out into the world on my own, other things presented themselves to me. And so there was more routes to explore the spiritual landscape and spiritual context. And so I kind of read and sort of fell into all these different things through just open curiosity. But then it really kicked in for me. I had an e-learning company, and I ended up going to Korea as part of a module that we were developing around Buddhism in Korea. And I stayed at the monastery. I stayed with the monks and had this incredible 2-week experience of practicing with them, living with them, and falling into their routine. And it just felt very deeply honorific of the spiritual and reverential towards the spiritual, but also reverential towards myself. And so that just sort of really kicked it in. This was about 20, it was 2001 maybe. And
Yeah.
so a good while ago, and it really just sort of kicked in a whole lot of other deeper exploration, excavation, and really deepening into not just Buddhist philosophy, but spiritual philosophy at large and spiritual teachings and wisdoms at large. And so, yeah, that's kind of the sort of the kernel into, I guess, the ongoing kind of investigation and hopefully some kind of innate, natural, embodied wisdom that moves through that and me, and I
Yeah.
guess in a way through my art and writing also.
It's amazing how like life just puts you in certain places that like you probably went there like not expecting to like get inspired on like a deep soul level, like you know what I mean, like that deep spiritual level, like being in Korea. Obviously, you were doing the Buddhist module, but it just being, I think something special about being around, like when you're around monks or people who are really invested in deeply living this knowledge and wisdom every day. There's like a vibration there that I think can like reveal your own like possibility of like feeling what they're experiencing too. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's almost like you
Totally.
start to vibrate at the same level they do just for a little bit of time, and then it goes away when you leave, in some sense. And so I'm curious, like when you were there in the monastery, was there any kind of like, were you practicing with the monks? Like, were you going through their daily routines, or were you just kind
Yeah.
of there as a guest?
Yeah, no, I was there initially as a guest and did the sort of filming that we did and took some photographs and everything like that. But then, they asked me to stay on. And so I lived with them. It was up at 3 o'clock in the morning and doing chanting and prostrations and kind of really deepening into the rhythms. And obviously there was meditation there, but it wasn't just the meditation. It's what you're talking about as well. It's the field of energy that
Mm-hmm.
exists. This was like a really, really incredible compound monastery. And so it's held and was in the hills, deep in nature. It's very like scenic and beautiful and like just as a place to inhabit naturally would have been incredible, but with this other deepening around you and then
Mm.
conversations with the monks, mostly Korean, there was a couple of Westerners that were living amongst them as well, were really deep and profound. And they are not just living it and sharing it, but they're kind of energetically in a deepening of themselves and the field that is the container for them to deepen into themselves. And that I think artists are very perceptive in many different ways, but that's a very real perception. It's not just something that you have a sense of as a um, cognitive idea. It's something that's
Mm-hmm.
very, very much alive in the field.
Yeah.
It's very much sort of like pulsing. And so you want to drink that in. You want to get closer to that. You want to understand at least some of that, both through the mind and through your own kind of just inhabitation of the experience. And I did. And so, yeah, it really kind of took me deeper into these kind of subtler realms, I suppose, because that's essentially what they're doing. They're developing capacity to work with not just the mind, but to exist in reality in a very different way to what the modern world teaches us. And
Yeah.
so not only was I curious about that, I was profoundly kind of jolted into, oh, this can be done. There's roots into this.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go and explore that more.
It's amazing. Yeah. It's like revealing to you that there's a different way to approach this place, this planet, and this bot and being embodied within it. Like there's in the West, like the way that we grow up, it's just like especially in the, late 20th century and into the 21st century, it's like there's this perspective that is kind of like woven into our culture about reality that I think is cut off from like those subtler dimensions. And so when you have access to something like beyond what you grew up learning or knowing or being taught, it like makes you think like, huh, like what else don't I know? Like what else is here? And there's a deep well there. And it sounds like it just catalyzed an amazing journey of discovery and inquiry, like you express like other wisdom traditions too, because I think when you look at a whole around the wisdom traditions that are kind of implanted all over this earth, they all on some level are speaking to this like subtler, more like vibratory, energetic, metaphysical space that you can't really put a finger on. You can't intellectualize, like you were pointing to, like you can't over intellectualize these things. You have to experience them. You have to like know them through your body and your mind in harmony with each other. And I
Yeah.
think these embodiment practices are like so valuable for any human being on the planet, but it's the access that's hard. And I think that when someone like yourself goes deep to explore it and try to embody it, it starts to like bleed into your reality in ways where you start to notice actually there's other people doing it too, but it's just not on the surface. And did you start connecting with like other people within your community that were like explorers of consciousness and interested in spirituality, or did you start to like connect with new communities of people? Like, because I feel like when you begin that journey, having support is so important. Like, were you able to find that in Melbourne, in Australia, where when you came back from Korea?
I was. I think when something like that turns on, the curiosity is alive, and so the natural disposition is to, continue seeking. And so, yeah, I kicked a few tires is a kind of a term. I looked around, and then I just sort of fell into a community, and it was a non-denominational meditation kind of community, really. And it really, what I really appreciated about that time and that space was it was, a lot of retreat, a lot of
Mm,
practice, deep practice. I went into my own, in a way, urban retreat lifestyle. I sort of lived for about 3 or 4 years, just by myself, meditating 5, 6 hours a day,
wow.
doing long retreats over the course of the year, um, heading off on different locations of the world and doing pilgrimage. Um, and so, yes, the sustenance that comes from other people also practicing, I think is very, very important and beneficial. And even just recently on a trip to Nepal, I sitting in community around some teachings, I felt that. But then also my natural inclination is to sort of go solo. So
Mm,
again, in Nepal, I went and hung out in the crew in the community that was a Buddhist context, but then I just went and sat in the cave. And I know it sounds cliche, but being by myself works for me because it allows those subtler perceptions to just arise naturally. They're not through a program, they're not through a process. They're actually just sort of coming through and sort of
mhm.
moving through me, and I'm allowing myself and allowing the space in myself and in my routine and in my interaction and relationship to life to bring these things forward. And they have. And it isn't just through community or practice, it's through study as well. It's
Yeah.
through, I went and studied the energetic field deeply. I became an energetic healer, energetic practitioner for a time there, and facilitated that. I understood different lenses of different wisdom teachings. And how energy works. And I'm still deep diving around that. I'm still investigating that. And my art
Wow.
is certainly trying to be a a response of that intimacy and a response of these relational things that arrive through your embodiment, through your perception, through the awakening of deeper perceptions, and then how that can then communicate through the aesthetic and through the aesthetic layer, because the aesthetic layer has a very powerful and potent opportunity to share intelligence differently,
Wow, I
not
like
through the
that.
mind.
Yeah. I love that idea. Yeah, the sharing of intelligence, like a deeper innate intelligence, like not about like who can recite the dictionary or an encyclopedic knowledge. It's like it's this intelligence that is like imbued in every aspect of life, on every level of life. It's like I love this idea. It's like you can understand the whole universe through one point of looking at the universe, because within one point is the whole universe. It's like everything, all the intelligence, all the wisdom is there. And so, like, this idea of like communication, I think that's a big part of what art is, right? It's about communication, bridging these gaps between seemingly islands of consciousness to recognize that we are not an island, that like you go beneath the water and it's fully connected right there. The land just keeps going. It's a misperception. And so I think when you make
Mm.
art that's kind of speaking to that energetic intelligence, it's kind of pointing back to us what we're made of, or what it is that we're a part of. And I think there's this unconscious recognition when you see art that is really deeply connected to that energetic space. That's how I feel. Like when I look at your work, like I can tell there's a deep, like a word you were saying, like intimacy with the energetic movements of these subtle fields that hold this whole thing together. And you can kind of get a feel for that with the colors, with the very simple forms, the geometries. And I think that, for me as a viewer, that's part of the joy of experiencing art is when you can feel like you're not alone because you can see this communication happening with someone else who you barely know on another part of the planet, and you feel like this deep communion with them. Like, oh my God, like there is something bigger going on here. And I feel like at this planetary moment, like, God, we need that. We need to understand that more than ever in our
Yeah.
bones because we are so caught up in this seemingly, potent web of delusion, that's propagated by culture and politics and this sense of materialism. And so this is the time where we need to like shatter those things and get to like the real fabric that holds us all together, which is energy, vibration, and these patterns of connectivity. I'm curious, like as an artist, because like you've done a few things in your career as a creative director. You said you're working for that learning company and stuff. Like, where did your like individual art practice start to emerge within that timeline?
Yeah, well, it's sort of always been there. I remember being a kid, just kind of, drawing, painting, creating. Um, and then you run it through a materialistic context of being a graphic designer and then a creative director. And so you're always working for a client and it's very didactic. It's problem solving. And so throughout that, there's like, okay, there's creative impulse at play and creative workings at play, but it's for solution rather than just articulation or expression. And so I was always in the background doing other kinds of art. Um, and just for myself, really, just for my own exploration, um, whether that was drawing, sketching, painting, playing, it was a way that I could keep these other artistic impulses moving through more freely and naturally. So yeah, you can frame them and corral them into the didactic and into the solution, but I need another place to put them. And so I would. And that was helpful. But then I guess in the last, I suppose since I went and studied the energetic field and I did this course and training in this modality called integral energetics. And what it allowed was the natural perceptions that I'd had since I was a kid, um, and I didn't have a place to locate it. It gave some kind of context and larger context and actual algorithmic and um, refined context to land and locate my perceptions of the energetic field and the different types of intelligence. We use the word intelligence, but there's different types of intelligence, right?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
so for that to be have a place to locate, it meant that I was like, as a facilitator and working in the energetic field and the discrete layers of um, sub-perception in sub-perception of the energetic realm, it's like, oh no, okay, so this needs exploring in an artistic practice. This needs a
Mm.
place um, to converse with our reality. And I'm actually really deeply interested in mystery because I think it's one thing to like talk about frequency and energetics and even have places and contexts to locate our understanding and to evolve our understanding of an energetic field, but not without the inclusion of mystery. Because I think as soon as you try to pin art down or pin any kind of reality down, spirit
It
starts to
moves.
leak out of the frame, right? Like it doesn't.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
great. Have context. Have place to locate it. Have a practice that is kind of informed by these kind of sort of deeper understandings and sensitivities and articulations and contexts, but also allow the mystery to exist as well. Because
Yeah.
there is something in that greater intelligence that's working through us, that's sponsoring us, that is working with this problem that you're talking about in culture at the moment, this materialistic, concretized density that's occurring throughout culture, particularly Western culture.
Mhm.
And yet there is, our beings are calling for warmth. They're
Yeah.
calling for these other ways to open and perceive and remember. And so, your art, my art, people, and I don't even like using the term spiritual art. I get that we probably want a bit of demarcation to try
Mhm.
and landscape it into some kind of other realm that's not the kind of paradigm of contemporary art.
Mhm.
But ultimately it is still art, and art has this
Hmm.
beautiful, incredible, profound opportunity to awaken that warmth within us that's innate, and to like allow it to kind of have kind of this sort of sympathetic relationship going on. And so
Yeah.
that's what I've sort of was over the last probably 10 years more deeply practicing, and awakening my own artistic practice from just kind of the natural kind of creative over here, playful space to no, there's actually something far more deeper occurring here. And
Yeah.
honestly, just to be like to keep the vessel clean and as clear as I can to allow that to move through me because it really isn't me or mine. It's just something that wants to find ways to serve the world and to come into life through so many of us. And so, how can I just participate in that as best I can?
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. That's so beautiful. And I feel a deep resonance with that, just my own kind of path and intention, the idea of service and being a vessel. I love the phrase you use, sponsor, like the spirit, like sponsoring us at this point. Like that's such a funny and amazing way to like phrase it. And with these, maps of energy, that you were talking about that you've been studying, like that's something that I've been deeply interested in too. There's and we look at different cultures, whether it's through like the Buddhist lens, the Vedic lens, or even you go into the indigenous lens of, I think about like South American, like indigenous wisdoms, like Toltec wisdoms, or even like the wisdoms we see around certain tribes exploring consciousness through plant medicine and things like that. They're mapping the energetic systems of the body. And they're obviously each culture might have a different expression of a similar idea of like the chakras or the nadis or the meridians and things like that. But if you really deeply turn within and you become quiet and learn how to quiet the mind and not go after something, not try to achieve a goal, but just to let the mud and the dust just settle through stillness down so clarity can just arise innately, you start to feel the movement of the energy in your body and in your sense perceptions. Like there's just it's so beautiful, but the problem is a lot of people's minds are so clogged up with thinking
Yeah.
and with cognition that it's hard for them to arrest those habits and patterns of the mind to like get into that clarity. And I think sometimes art can be an arresting, experience where it just makes you stop and
It
sit.
makes you stop. I mean, that's what James
Yeah.
Joyce spoke about, aesthetic arrest. There is this
Yeah.
moment of like arrest where you
Yeah.
actually are forced into the moment, which is
Yes.
harder and harder in this day and age because of the overstimulation of everything, and
Mm.
also the fact that we've gotten further away from nature, and that we're certainly getting further away from practicing, like actively practicing restfulness, which is one of the
Mhm.
reasons why I hold a disciplined meditation practice and an inquiry investigation, because you're getting into these stiller places as a practice. And
Yeah.
ultimately, that's where my art arises from. All my art comes from visions. Like when you get into the depths and the stillness and you practice that over time, you start to understand this. There's different layers of imagination and inspiration. And I could get into a whole thesis around the differences of how that works energetically. But even just the idea that things will arrive through in those stiller spaces, for me, the rhythms and the forms, these are things that I see, they feel, that they are the intelligence in an aesthetic um, like response or an aesthetic kind of presentation. And
Hmm.
so for me, one of the reasons why I go back to this point of like it's moving through me is like, well, where does that arise from? Like I'm not
Hmm.
pulling that in necessarily. I'm actively just being still, and these things are moving into my consciousness, into my awareness, and I'm sketching them out. Like if I go on a retreat, I may just go on a retreat and practice stillness and not touch my notepad, or I may actively practice being still, and then all of a sudden there's just this flood of inspiration or ideation
Yeah.
or intelligent symbols or forms that I don't necessarily need to unlock. I just want to catch and bring through in the art. And the art and the
Exactly.
relationship people have with the art is where it unlocks, actually.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like we can't try to fully understand or comprehend, like you were saying earlier about the mystery, like just letting things be mysterious, letting things be unknown. And it's really hard. when especially like in a culture where the intellect is kind of king, where like knowing and understanding and dissecting and reverse engineering and this sort of reductive kind of mentality that we bring to stuff, it's really hard to move against that current, because that's how we've been conditioned through our education and through
Mm.
just, not, I know I say I'm being very general, but it's kind of obvious when you see the way the Western world is kind of set up. And so this is a practice of just surrendering, of letting go, of allowing, of being in a way that anything that arises, even the visions that can arise, like we can understand that like they're temporary too, but there's something special there to garner and to channel into artwork or into our lives. Like sometimes a vision can come up that's highly emotionally charged, and that emotion could loosen up some kind of energy in the body that then creates an insight. And then from the insight comes transformation in terms of certain patterns of behavior or thinking or a misunderstanding of a life experience. Like it doesn't have to be just for artists to make art with, right? But I think being an artist who is invested in this space, it is such a blessing to like be a part of that process of like collaboration. Like I think it's like I'm in collaboration, like this vessel with the memories I have, the personality I have, the skills that I've accrued, like is here to receive an inspiration that's not for just for me, but it's for something that I don't even understand. And that's awesome and okay. I don't have to understand it. Sometimes, like, I'm making art and like someone talks to me about my work and they're trying to get to this intellectual, engineering of it. And it's hard for me to like, express it like I don't really know. I don't know why it's this way. It's what I just feel compelled to do. And to me, like that makes me really excited as an artist to like not really fully understand even the work that I make. Do you ever feel that
Yeah.
about your own work? Like you can understand it to a point, but then there's a point where you just like, I don't get it, but it's something I need to do, you know?
Both. For me,
Yeah.
it's both. I mean, I think the more I've practiced and the more I've fallen into the role of an artist, um, the more the insights come with the unknowing. And so that's a bit of a paradox, right? Because
Yeah.
I can create the work, and I did like one of the things that really stood out for me as a when I was an energetic facilitator and I was working with people is I was creating channeling symbols for them and the healing symbols and things like that. And again, intelligence in some kind of abstraction or context that they could then relate to with their own consciousness. But then I was also creating programmatical art. So it was very deeply intentional. I was creating them fields of energy, art that they could then program to work with their own healing or their own processes of evolution. And so that was very deeply inspired and came through as an idea. But then we started practicing, and people were having big experiences. And I was understanding before I made the art for them how it was going to affect them. In like, I could see in three
Yeah.
months' time, they were going to have this experience because that particular shape and corner of a collar was actually going to catch their eye and it was going to pull them into something in themselves. I don't need to know the why behind that, but I could at
Hmm.
least sense that there was something that was going to happen. And so you can work very intentionally in that. And a lot of my work, when I put nodes on my work and I build maps in behind the work that's got fields of energetic like I guess they're in a way they're kind of energetic maps that you can entrain consciousness to. It's all deeply very intentional, and the sponsorship that comes through me or the intelligence that comes through me gives me insights to these things, right? It's
Hmm.
telling me of these things, but the both part. At times, I don't know, and I don't need to know, and this
Yeah.
is the reason that I am allowing of it not needing to know is I think one of the reasons why it presents as an understanding in me. I'm not trying to understand it. So, but then when I get the vision, part of the intelligence in the vision also informs me and my understanding. And so
Hmm.
that subtler in subtler in subtler in quieter in quieter in quieter space that I inhabit allows these things to come through. And yes, it can be very hard to articulate in a like language context. And sometimes it's very hard to articulate in even through the aesthetic, through the artistic expression context. And I don't think that people have the natural, in today's age, the natural ability to get into it as deeply as I might perceive it. But that's okay. There's still
Exactly. Yeah.
something in that most people, when they see my art or they experience my art, that knows that something's going on. And so, therefore, at least, at the very least, they're folding into a new type of relationship towards art. And I think that's what we really want to see happen over the
Mhm.
next little while with art. Art has this great opportunity to be a different way in which we relate to life through the constructs of life in front of us. It's
Yeah.
no different from the work that I intentionally create to then sitting in front of a tree and just studying the bark, right? Like it's still a portal, right? They're all portals. It's like, how can we? And so then, all right, if they're all portals, like at least how can then I intentionally understand that as a artist and then intentionally curate my art to make it more of a portal, not make
Hmm.
it, but like allow it to be more of a portal through
Yeah.
the stillness that I allow
Yeah.
that for it to come through. Is that
Yeah,
making sense?
to harness it more. Like you become more skillful the more experience you have and how you harness what's coming
Yeah.
through. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not like water just exploding out of a fire hose that no one's holding on to, just going everywhere. Like eventually, like you learn how to direct it,
Yeah.
but to your point about like the experience people have, like not understanding it from an intellectual point is perfectly fine. It's all about experience and feeling and connecting to it. And I think on some subtle level, the unconscious parts of the mind that are like beneath like the rational kind of thinking recognizes it and it intuitively draws them toward certain pieces for certain reasons because of that intelligence that's embedded through the process of making it that's coming through. And it makes
Mm,
me think about like also just the benefit that people have like experiencing art that has nothing to do with like understanding it or intellectualizing it, but there's some kind of relationship happening between the visual stimulus, the imagery, and the brain states that it can induce. And I know that's something that you've kind of really looked into. And I'd love to hear more about like your studies and investigations in like brainwave states in relation to the art, like thinking about there's like the brainwave states and like the neurobiology that like is sort of a part of how we experience imagery and sensation through the senses that we have. Like let's dig into that a little bit. I'm really curious like how that
yeah.
arrived for you and what you learned from that.
For sure. It arrived through some of the energetic studies that I was doing, and as an adjunct to that, I went and studied brainwaves and was did a 2 week deep dive course with an incredible facilitator. And the kit they had, the tech they had was, you hook everyone up, and you're actually monitoring brainwaves, and you're monitoring brainwaves from a consciousness perspective. You're not just, looking at exactly what's flaring and just saying, oh, that's just a gamma flare there. You're actually looking at it within a 40-year map of deep study around the tech they had, which was allowing you to then sort of see the brainwave patterns that it would produce as that were higher states of consciousness. And so, okay, on one hand, I'm studying the energetic field and I'm understanding more and more about these different subperceptual intelligences that are informing the greater experience of life and the greater fieldic interaction of life. And then I'm also then studying the brainwaves and the brainwaves as states of experience that map into energetic experiences. So we could directly through that see that when you were having an expanded consciousness moment, there were certain patterns in your brainwaves that were activated or were showing up as part of the activation, and you could
Mm-hmm.
directly correlate it. And so part of this is hypnosis and going into journeyed exploration of consciousness. And then when you sort of run through the story or the architecture of visualization, things would come online, and then you would have these moments, and then you'd look back over the real-time mapping, and you would see, oh wow, that's a gigantic gamma flare and incoherence. And so it's not just a gamma flare out there, it's a gamma flare that comes through, which suggests, based on all their studies they've got, that there is actually something deeply coherent in the consciousness that's occurring. And it's not just gamma, it's coming out of like most people have busy brainwave flares, beta brainwave flares. But then it's also like, how do you stabilize that? You come down, you might stabilize that down through alpha into a theta, potentially even deeper into delta. And so seeing that and learning that and becoming a practitioner of that particular way of exploring consciousness and visually mapping consciousness through technology. Um, well, I got more curious about that. And so then I hooked people up and sort of walked them into my art. And so we could see that there was things happening. And I want to study this even more than I have. And it was a little while ago when I did it, and I am circling back around to wanting to do more of it. But what it did show me is that definitely things were happening. And so then what I started doing is I would walk people through my art, not hooked up, just like I'd have people come over and I'd do a journey through the nodes that I put on my art into these other realms in behind the art that I create and can hold a coherent field for people to enter into. They work with that and they bring it back out through the art, and then they get the insight. There's this problem that they might go into the journey with, and then there's an insight that reveals
Mhm.
itself through this journey. And so
Wow.
what we're essentially talking about is not just a portal for anything to happen. We're talking about art as a portal for the consciousness to engage quite directly into and activate these other intuitive layers within us. And I want to talk about intuition in a minute, but um, such that intuition can reveal, because it's already there. It's just, how do we access it? And so
Yes.
art is just one way of accessing it. Sure, you can go and do some kind of exogenous medicine or something like that and take that, and you might have a state change and a revelation might come through. But why can't that also be through art? And why can't art potentially even do it in, potentially, I'm going to say something a little bit controversial, even more coherent way, because it's slower and um, calmer rather than
Mhm.
this big, massive experience. You can
Yeah.
still have experience. You can still have kind of like, whoa, there's a whoa moment here. And
Yeah.
I believe that happens with some of the things that I've journeyed people through with my art. But yeah, so why can't art do that? Why can't art be kind of leading us towards different ways to engage our consciousness, cohere our consciousness, steady our consciousness, align our consciousness? And so that's deeply, deeply what I'm interested in, not just what my art's doing and not just what it's doing through what the brainwaves are showing, but what it's doing with people that sort of present to the art, step into that experience, and then they have something that they can then take away. Or some clients, commissions that I've done, it's there. They can sit and meditate with it, and I
Exactly.
teach
Yeah.
them. I teach them how to program it so that it will reveal. And then 3 days later, they're walking past, and then just bang, the art's emanating and pulsing into the room. Or if someone in the house is sick and they've got an illness that they're dealing with, how can you program the art to give you the right frequencies and pull from those other domains, those other subtle realm domains, and into the more physical, material, like home space, and just pulse energy in? Art's
Mm.
pulsing anyway, but
Yeah.
what if we're doing it more intentionally? Right.
Yes.
And so this is what I'm deeply curious with, how we can interface art as a technology or as a substrate that's not just the visual and aesthetic, but it's energy through the visual and aesthetic.
Exactly. Like the visual aesthetic is the medium through which the energy is translated, you know? And those are amazing questions. I mean, it gets me so excited, like when you're talking about that, because like the potential of art, like we aren't really tapping into yet as a whole, like of what it can do for healing, what it can do for like the coherence, within your daily life. Like if you're around like this energetic kind of art on a daily basis, it's impacting you. And I'm sure you probably hear from clients and patrons, people who have your work probably contact you randomly here and there, just be like, to tell you like this is so powerful and so impactful for our environment. Like they can feel it. It sometimes it happens right away, and sometimes it's subtle and it takes time. And just to like point, go back to your point just about like the plant medicine, like the explosive opening of consciousness that you can engage in, which can be incredibly transformative and powerful. It's something that I've definitely experienced, but it's not the solution ultimately. It's really the beginning. It's really just for a lot of people, it's just initiating you that there is this layer and dimension of energy and intelligence beyond what you ever imagined. And then the real work is like, how do you integrate that into your daily life without any exogenous substance? How do you utilize the framework of your own intelligent consciousness that's permeating every cell in your body to reveal those same kinds of insights on their own? It obviously takes deep practice and commitment and discipline. But I think some of the darker corners of the plant medicine world tend to emerge when people think that it's the solution to the ultimate problem, as opposed to being like sort of like a catalyst for your own beginning of exploring it. Does that make sense?
Perfect
Like,
sense.
and that's how
Yeah.
I feel about it. And I think something like art, like, because a lot of the times at the end of the day, it's not about these big, monumental, life changing experience. It's about the subtle, soft, quiet, consistent daily like connection to this field of energy, so that it's imbued in the actions that you take in the world, so that they come from a place of deep wisdom and compassion, which is the only way that we're going to solve any problems that we create for ourselves on this planet, is to
Yeah.
reconnect with that innate intuitive wisdom and compassion that is really inside of all of our hearts. It's just like, how do we unlock it? And I think art is a major tool that we have to unlock it, if we can really give it the credence it deserves to have the space it needs to serve in that way. And I think culturally,
Mm.
in our lives, obviously you and I, we do it all the time. Like but we're not the norm. And so the question is like, how do we make this more ubiquitous? How do we make this more understood on a wider scale? Because I think it's one of the many tools we have in our toolkit to transform consciousness on a global level, so that we can evolve this situation that we are in on this planet for good. But it's I don't know. It's mysterious in terms of like how that's all going to unfold. But when I talk to someone like yourself, it gets me really excited, because I'm like, I feel like this is part of my own mission as well, is to kind of answer that question you asked and figure out the how do we do just that? How do we bring people into a space where they can realize that art does have a greater power beyond status, and material, bragging rights, or laundering your money through the, high-end art,
Yeah.
art acquisitions.
I mean, we could get into the whole conversation around what's wrong with that art world, and some of my writings do sort of
Yeah,
explore
everyone
that.
out there, he wrote an amazing essay on his website. I forget the title of the essay, but that really says it all. Like, we can talk a little bit about it here, but like, definitely go out there and read that. But continue. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thanks. And so I guess the train of thought I wanted to go down was, okay, sure, there's problems with the art world, but I do feel like there's this opportunity that's presenting through when we start to understand ourselves and we come into these stillnesses, we start to have a reverence for life. And that is something that the more that we consciously explore, the more that just innately turns on in us. I think it's there anyway as a kid, right? But it gets
Mm-hmm.
sort of bred out of us and tuned out of us. But when that reverence comes on, and reawakens or becomes sort of magnified in our experience, in a way, we can still see the ills of the world and the problems of the world, but we can, in a way, it's like medicine that allows us to be optimistic. And so, one of the things that I also really want to do intentionally with my work is to ensure that not only is it reverential towards the spiritual and reverential towards the mystery and reverential towards the unknown and the graces that come from the unknown, but also reverential towards this sort of optimistic like embodiment that we can take on, because otherwise you get caught in the darkness, you get
Mm-hmm.
caught in all these other things, and it's not a sweeping over of that, it's not an ignorance of that, it's just a resource that you can use to navigate life with more optimism. And then when we do that, then I think those perceptions actually turn on. And okay, it's fine to take those things that you were talking about, and I had the big download and all this sort of stuff. But often it's very chaotic.
Hmm. Yeah,
Reverence
disorienting.
and disoriented, and
Yeah,
you can take a lifetime just integrating it, or you can just go and do another journey a week later and then have something else to do, like, and that's happening, and that's fine, and it
yeah,
becomes more chaos. But sometimes I think in the stillness, when reverence exists, the precision, the refinement, the deeper gnosis that arrives is actually where it's at. And
definitely.
so that is really interesting to me. Like, how can we I already think we are evolving based on this optimistic nature that I have. I do think that's happening. How can I just participate in that? How
Yeah,
can I share into that? How can my work share into that? How can artists consciously understand that they are sharing into this greater intelligence that's doing part of the evolution? It's not for
yes.
me to unlock. I am not that intelligent. I would never claim to be. I can't. I can't, right? Like, it's something in the grand mystery that I
Yeah,
have to, in a way, just defer to and have reverence to. And that therefore means that I can do it with a lot more ease. And when I do it with a lot more ease, things turn on, things show
definitely.
up, things move through my own gnosis and my own deepening and developing that is kind of part of just how I may be able to participate in planting more seeds for whatever's to come.
Yes, exactly. I love that you said planting seeds. Like that's exactly how I think about it too. It's like because we're not in control ultimately of the outcome, but we can plant these seeds of consciousness, of compassion, of love, of deep healing energy, right? And we can let those root as in the way that they're going to. But like our job is not to like control whether they sprout or not. Our job is just to keep planting, and the intelligence of the universe will do the rest. And so like how do we like embody like our greatest selves to plant the seeds that will, you know, do the thing that, I think that the intelligence of this whole system is trying to do, which is awakening to our
Mm.
true nature, awakening to bodhicitta, this like compassionate nature of our consciousness that is underpins all of reality, even
Mm.
the darkest corners of reality. And it's beautiful. That's why I personally was always drawn to like the Buddhist path, especially the Vajrayana Buddhism. Like the meticulousness, the depth, the detail, the imagination, the
Mm.
colors, the textures, the energy, the practices that all are involved in those traditions. And within the Vajrayana, there are so many different lineages and practices and stuff. It is like the deepest well. One of them I found that humanity has dug. There are many other deep wells, but for me, it's like there's something so incredible about the practices and the approach toward initiating someone into these experiences that we're kind of talking about. And that's kind of where I've found myself. And it seems like that's kind of a part of your journey too. And I was curious to see maybe if we can shift the conversation to kind of hear more about your experience with Tibetan Buddhism and how that's kind of impacted your spiritual practice, and then henceforth impacted your creative practice.
Yeah. I mean, massively. One of the things I love about Vajrayana Buddhism is that it's a very steepened process. It's a practice that works, like you say. They've gone there, they've worked it out, and it works. And it's incredibly esoteric. It's
Okay.
incredibly tantric. It's incredibly kind of like imaginative. And it through that, it will turn on your imagination. It will turn on your access to these other realms because it's just part of how it's processes. Um, I through the Korean experience, the Korean Buddhist sort of monastery experience, sort of I got deeply interested in Buddhism, and then some of these kind of deeper tenets of wisdom that come out of the Buddhist philosophies, and then I explored Theravadan Buddhism, and then the Tibetan one, probably because of all that kind of profound mandalas and kola and visualization practices, really, really turned something on in me. And I don't know whether it was just something that was latent and just reawakened or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But I got very deeply inspired. And so I actually, I pilgrimaged. I went to Tibet. I went to Mount Kailash and spent time
Wow.
there. And I went to different sacred sites and meditated. And it's a little bit cliche to say I went and sat in the cave, but I did. And
That's
when you sit,
amazing. That's not
and like
cliche.
even recently, my time sitting in a cave in Nepal, like very deliberate because some incredible Buddhist Vajrayana practitioners had spent time over thousands of years in this cave. And it's not something to enter into lightly. It's deeply, deeply palpable. Your cells like pulse
Hmm.
and vibrate. And so then what happens is all the Vajrayana um, imaginal realm activities and practices basically just disappear because it's just like you're just sitting in this sort of like rarefied state and
Yeah.
space that is conducive to getting into that state and such that like I don't need to do the I went and did a 4 day teaching just prior to going to the cave that I intended to do in the cave. I didn't want to do. I didn't need to do it because the cave was just like pulsing and emanating and still, in a way, kind of like direct perception of a version of reality. And I'm sure there are many and many and many and many more to go into. But at least for my experience recently there and elsewhere when I've practiced through different sacred sites and pilgrimage, um, they inform us, they embed onto us in those moments and beyond different states of consciousness, different experiences of reality. And so I find that deeply, deeply infusive of how I see the world, how I exist in the world, how I go beyond that out into the world in householder land. Um,
Yep.
Having a family and a life and, making art. I don't really sell much of my art. I probably should do better at that, but I also don't really like the way in which art is structured as a commodity. I'd actually
Yeah.
rather give most of my art away.
I
I mean,
know.
yeah, we still have to subsist, and that's totally fine and fair, but I'm deeply interested in how through my understanding of bodhicitta and humility and um, open states of awareness, consciousnesses, how we can then use that as a way to exist in the world that works. I don't know. I don't know how that works, but
Yeah.
I'm really interested in that. I'm really interested in how art isn't just things that we can use as portals and activating our consciousness and stuff, but also how we can use art as a way that I imagine before even the term fine art, which is only pretty relatively recent, 18th century modernist term, it's before that, like the arts were imbued in everything really, and they were
Hmm.
appreciated and respected differently. And so therefore the way that people subsisted from their craft um, was deeply embedded and infused through culture, as opposed to what's
Exactly.
happened since we coined the term fine art and we've run down this road, which I believe now 200 plus years into, it just doesn't make sense anymore. And how we conceptualize art and how art is a commodification and a business, it doesn't work. So I'm really deeply interested in how the Vajrayana reciprocities of engaging with life can also be just how I do art and it find its way back through circulation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's a whole thing to discuss perhaps for another time. But I think to really answer your question, the Vajrayana Buddhist lens is deeply, deeply steeped in all kinds of rivers and routes of exploration. And as a curious person, that's very activational for me. But
Hmm.
also, I guess the pith, no matter which lineage or which kind of school of the sects in the Tibetan Vajrayana world you want to investigate, they're kind of all either Mahamudra or Dzogchen. They're kind of all pointing to the same emptiness realized space,
Yep.
and that's kind of my orientation anyway, and deepening inquiry and in a way directionality without the force or the impulse to get there too, because that's a trap.
Right. Exactly. That's the paradox too, right? Man, you said a lot of things that I like. I could dive so many places. One thing you said that I just like, I started thinking about too, because it really related to our earlier part of our conversation, was like talking about like your experience in the caves in Nepal or other sacred sites, like how there was imbued with this kind of field of energy. There was this kind of palpable experience within the field of that particular place. And it was kind of imbued there through hundreds, thousands of years of practice in that space. And I think about like that field of energy, like we're talking about imbuing it within the art, like how that's holding
Completely.
that field of energy. Like there's something amazing that is possible with the right intention, the right practice, the right understanding and approach. That's why like sacred sites of all kinds from many different cultures and spiritual backgrounds hold this like deep, palpable energy for people, energy of reverence, right? There's something that happens there when the consciousness is aligned with an intention, aligned with a skillful means within a particular place. It just, that place is no longer the same. And I think with art, like you can create a smaller version of that in some way. And so there's obviously something going on there. There's a reason that
Mm.
these sites, we think of like the pyramids of Giza, we think of Machu Picchu, Göbekli Tepe is like an interesting site that we don't really understand yet, but it's like shattering our notions of how old civilization is. Like there's so much Stonehenge, right? Like there's so many mysteries around like who we really are. And I feel like and I'm not the first to say this, I'm really just regurgitating other intelligent people, but like we are kind of maybe a species with amnesia, like that we've forgotten our true nature. We've forgotten like what we're doing here. And in the same token, like your comment about like artisans and craftsmen within were supported within cultural context forever. And then all of a sudden they're pulled out of that, and now it's more of a commodification game. It's a capitalist game of buying and selling and trading, as opposed to like this culture reveres artwork, and the artists and the artisans who are creating it are just naturally going to be supported by the culture at large. But that's just not, now we are in a game where we're all just kind of like, we're salesmen, we're trying to sell something. And I
Mm.
I pray and I envision like how can we get back to that where the
Well, I think
artisan.
we are.
I hope
No,
so. Yeah.
no, I think we are. I really, and that maybe it is, excuse me, the optimist in me. But I don't mean to interrupt, but I do want to take
No,
this thread.
yeah.
I think we are. I think that's why we're having this conversation. I think that's why you've got a podcast. It's one thing for a book to be written 20, 30 years ago that points towards it, or maybe a bit longer, but there is a movement, there is an energy, there is a surfacing of remembering and of consciousness that is wanting to use art, and through all the lenses of art, including music, poetry, dance, all the different aspects of it, it's wanting to understand that there is warmth in art.
Mhm.
Okay, art is not about fine. Art can be didactic, and art can be about catharsis, and it can be about process, and sometimes the process is really helpful to dive down into it, right, and to you know writhe and squirmishly kind of try and navigate the depths, right? Like that's part of art. I get that, and it's really important. But I sense in the future and being fed from the past, and I don't know how far back from past it would certainly be not be our normal documented history past, but art has not just a role to play. Art is deeply, deeply, deeply beyond even the idea of just craftsmen. Art is deeply part of culture. Art is not just transmission. And I've been really, really kind of playing with this idea a lot lately, transmission and diffusion. So there is transmission, which is the directional like impulse and energetic kind of like aha
Mhm.
versus the dispersion, the diffusion, and then how that kind of moves back out through culture to develop stabilization.
Mhm.
And so I think this is a really interesting idea, and it maps into quantum mechanics and other kind of philosophical realms, transmission and diffusion. But art for me and what we're practicing, what you're creating, what I am creating, is actually as much about the diffusion. It's about as part of an extension of the idea of seeds, and it's about allowing that to stabilize through some of the unhelpfulnesses of culture now and reality now, such that it can continue to awaken and lift up into these other ways in which art can be perceived, received, used, the utility of it beyond kind of commercialization, like art as a language, like symbols are deeply part of our artistic history, both long term and short term. But how can we use symbols as a way to have a whole paragraph or a whole book just in a symbol, right? Like this is
Hmm.
possible. This is
Yeah.
possible, particularly when our consciousness starts to develop relationship beyond the cognitive churn of just language, which
Yeah.
is why aesthetic, coming from the Greek word, I can't remember, I think I can't remember exactly how the Greeks used it, but essentially meaning to perceive and to feel. And this is beyond the mind. This is
Hmm.
perception and feeling that is gnosis beyond the mind,
Yeah.
which is the right hemisphere. I don't want to get into Ian McGilchrist, which I'm a deep, deep fan of, but
Yeah.
like this left brain dominated society and
Yep.
reality and world
Exactly.
that needs to be repositioned back to how it should be. And that
Hmm.
is a fairly controversial statement, but it's a very real statement. It should be.
Yeah.
Right should lead. The ability to perceive and feel and know through that, and intellect sitting in behind the imaginal, is
Yes.
actually where culture really wants to go. And I think I'd offer that to anyone listening who wants to challenge that, to really like inquire into. I imagine most people that are artists get that anyway. But
Yeah.
if that's a challenge to you, that statement, to really feel into why you think the logical, linear, directional, safe way of interacting with life that doesn't afford mystery, that doesn't afford the sub-perceptible, like why that would lock you away from all this other incredible horizon that is available to us.
I know. Yeah. I mean, I'm right there with you, like the linear hyperlogical framework, it's a tool for us. It's an aspect of our mind that we can use to do a lot of amazing things. But when you look at the cosmos, it's not linear. It's cyclical. It's all about, like, I don't know, there is a disconnect there. So I'm totally in alignment and agreement there. I love this idea also. You're talking about like the transmission and then the diffusion. And then a word that came to my mind is like, if there's a third prong to that, maybe osmosis,
Mm.
where the diffusion then starts to have that osmosis where it starts to filter in and impact everything,
Yeah.
where it starts to mix and meld and everything kind of becomes not homogenized, but like becomes unified.
Well, it informs the reality of the greater field. Like this is some of Rupert Sheldrake's work in the morphogenetic field,
Yes,
and the
exactly.
idea that if there is a field at play, and the more that we re-intelligize it, that's my word, with the seeds, with the seeds of our expression, with the seeds of our consciousness, the more it becomes available to others later on, because the field is going to pulse with those alivenings. So it's not just me doing my work or you doing yours, it's the hundreds of other spiritually inclined, consciously inclined artists that are creating work with these kind of deeper sensitivities and understandings. And to be honest, like throughout time, most artists have had this. They've always been on the front foot. They've always been ahead of culture. They've always been ahead of the
Yep.
common understood realities. They're bleeding the future into the now, which sometimes clearly is a disservice because people won't get it or people don't know how to interact with that. But that's the job of the artist. The job of the artist is to fuse that back down into now, seed it so that when we get there, that field is strengthened and emboldened enough with those intelligences so that we can actually exist there more coherently.
Yeah. Wow, that's such a great point because yeah, like everyone thinks about like the role that they're going to play, in their life. And sometimes you don't really understand fully like what your role is, but you just know there's something you have to do. Like whether like for example, for us in our case, it's creating the work that we're creating and living kind of in this space and practicing in these sort of ways. Like we don't really know like what how the dominoes are going to fall from all of that, but like we are in a sense strengthening that morphogenic field, because the more of us that do it, then the more of us can do it, then the more of us can do it, and then all of a sudden we're all there. And so that's
Yeah,
kind of
we're all
how
there.
it begins, you know. And so I do see that process happening. I mean, I've, have with this podcast talking to so many like-minded artists like yourself, like it's just obvious to me. Obviously I'm seeking out these kinds of people too. Like
Yeah.
there's a part of the action that I'm putting forth to kind of do this thing, but it's like the more I talk to people like yourself, the more it just becomes like blatantly obvious that like there's some magical shit going on here, and
Yeah.
I'm super grateful to play my small little role in this much bigger story, and
Yeah, well, thank you for the role that you are playing because you're giving voice to these intelligences in people and the different ways that it refracts through us. Like we're all
mhm.
individual and unique, and that's great. But yet we're also sort of commonly held by this other kind of infusement of an expression that's wanting to move through consciousness, through reality. I mean, another way to look at it, right, is, and I know it's hard for artists because artists create work and they want their work to be seen and appreciated and understood, whatever understood means beyond
Yeah.
the kind of mind. But and they also want to subsist. They also want to live. But what if, here's an invitation. What if just the act of creating, to all artists listening, if God is watching that, like, isn't that enough? Like, right? Particularly if
Yeah.
we're talking about seeding the field, like it's there. Like the fact that that's being created, it doesn't really matter. Like I've got bodies and bodies of work here that probably isn't seen. And my partner says, share it, show more people, have an exhibition, all this sort of stuff. It's like, yeah, but I think it is seen. I think
Mhm.
it lands somewhere. It's
Yeah.
coming through, it's being articulated into some version of something that is important enough sometimes.
I think it's the most important thing because at the end of the day, like, yeah, like I have a family too. Like there are practicalities to my life, and being able to sustain my life as an artist would be a dream, like full time, if I could do that. And I'm working toward trying to find ways, my own creative ways to do that, because I'm just so obsessed, maybe not be the right word, but just like deeply like driven to like embody this more and more deeply on a daily basis, to like put my energy into this space more and more, and like cut all of the extraneous things that I have to do to survive, so that this could be a way that I can also survive too. That's amazing. But at the end of the day, this is all temporary. Like I don't know if I'll be here tomorrow or next week or next year or 10 years from now. And at the end of the day, all these paintings are going to turn to dust anyway. It's really not about that. It's about impacting the field. It's about impacting this greater consciousness and developing that greater coherence. And that
Mm.
is what I always try to remind myself when I get caught up in the poor me mentality, where like ambition and like ego start to battle within you, because we all deal with that. Is to remember to expand my consciousness, see the biggest perspective I can see, which is like none of that really is going to matter at the end of the day. But what matters is the bodhicitta, the living with the heart and acting from that place, and using the energy to impact the greater energy of all of us in some little way. And like that is the best thing you can do, in my mind. And that gives me a sense of like restfulness and peace, and reminds me of that so that I stay grounded. Because the ego is wants attention, wants acknowledgement, wants
Mm.
control, wants all of that. And so, like,
Yeah.
you have to see those mechanisms within yourself in order to dismantle them.
Yeah, and you can
Yeah,
revitalize the ego with the humility. I mean, I don't think we
exactly.
need to entirely dismiss some of the egoic domain. I think there is ways that we can um, re-articulate and refresh our ego so that it is in service,
So,
that it is
exactly.
so
Mhm.
that it is kind of like aligned to something greater, that it is um, committed to maintaining that alignment. I mentioned before about keeping the vessel clear and
Mhm.
allowing the conduit to remain. Like all these things, like the humility of the work and just doing the work, it matters. It does matter. I believe it deeply that it matters. And that could be a story that I tell myself, but it is also part of my deeper philosophical and spiritual studies, like I do deeply, deeply believe that it matters. It doesn't matter necessarily in some of the lenses that we get lost in, but I do think it matters to be that conduit, to allow
100%.
expression, to acknowledge the warmth that comes through listening to beyond and allowing it to express through us, to acknowledge the warmth that that may invite and open in other people, to acknowledge the warmth and the warming of this cold version of reality that we can easily get lost in that happens through art. Like it matters.
It does. It does matter. I think that's maybe a great way to end it. I mean, we've been going for a little over an hour, and I think we could just keep talking. And I'm hoping one day we can probably do a part two of this, because I think there's a lot of little nooks and crannies that we kind of like pointed at here and there, but like we could have dove into. But such a beautiful conversation, such a beautiful message, a way to kind of tie up the conversation that we're having here together today. And I just can't thank you enough for joining me on the podcast and engaging in this really epic dialogue that we just had. It's going to be fun to digest it as my day goes on. And everyone out there, check the show notes. You got to check Jason's work, website, Instagram, follow him there, like stay in touch with what he's doing, because I know this is really just the beginning, I think, of more magical things that are be coming out of your studio and your practice. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Thank you for all you're doing to kind of keep this alive and relevant for now and for this time. Thank you for the invitation. And maybe there'll be a part two. I'd love to talk more. There's
Oh
always
yeah.
things to kind of explore in this space, and I've got lots of ideas and thoughts on it for sure. But thank you again.
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. Well, we'll talk soon. Okay. Peace.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Concerning the Spiritual and Art. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay in touch and in tune with all the amazing offerings that we're going to be bringing to this channel. Thanks again for all your support. Super grateful, and excited to bring more content your way. Peace, y'all.